Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of this show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are.
I'm Michael Brody-Waite, and this is The Path to Authenticity.
I'm Tom Gentry. Thanks for listening. This episode features a conversation with an author and entrepreneur named Michael Brody-Waite. He lives in Nashville. He was featured in TEDx Nashville, where he did a presentation called Great Leaders Do What Drug Addicts Do. So this conversation took place on the date of the release of his book, which you'll hear all about. So I hope you enjoy it. Michael Brody-Waite.
Just the product of bad seeds.
So I know you have a book coming out, right?
Yeah, it came out today, actually, while we're recording.
That's what I thought. So what's it called?
It's called Great Leaders Live Like Drug Addicts, How to Lead Like Your Life Depends on It.
So that's a pretty bold title, isn't it?
Yeah, it catches people's attention, which was not the purpose, but I typically have to explain it, and then once I explain it, they get it. But at first blush, people go, "What?"
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I've seen your YouTube video, so I know the point. But for someone who's listening who hasn't seen your YouTube video, how do you explain it?
Sure. So it's a double entendre. It actually has two meanings. So when I say great leaders are like drug addicts, and I look at the leaders in our past and our present, I see people that are acting like active drug addicts in active addiction. They're fixing, managing, and controlling perception in order to get what they want. And then when I think about the great leaders in our future, and I think about how they will lead, I think it's going to be in a completely different way. I think they will lead with what I call rigorous authenticity. And I think that the only segment of our society that has been trained to truly live and lead authentically are recovering addicts. And so addicts are both experts in hiding their true selves, and then they have to become experts in working a process and a program that allows us to truly be free and show our true selves. And in the process, we learn a completely new way to lead. And that's why great leaders look like drug addicts.
Being a person in long-term recovery myself, it's something that we learn pretty quickly when we stick around and start to get better, that our, what we consider our flaws ultimately become our assets. And we kind of have an advantage to the rest of the world because we have a principled way of life to follow. We have a structure to follow that I'm sure there's some other, people out there with different lifestyles who have that sort of thing, but I don't think there are many. Do you?
No, I mean, so one of the things is like being authentic as a leader, not a new concept. We want authentic brands, we want authentic products, we want authentic companies, authentic leaders, like whatever. But we don't actually have that. We say we want it, but we don't have it. When was the last time you heard a politician answer a question with, "I don't know"?
Right.
We do not have that. And the reason that we don't have that is we've misclassified the problem. We think that leaders need to just be authentic. They need to just stop being inauthentic, right? Well, the thing is with addiction, we don't understand that leaders are addicted to hiding their true selves, or what I call like hiding behind a mask.
Mm-hmm.
And a figurative mask, of course, like we're in a pandemic and some people are doing physical masks, but I'm talking about figurative masks. And so they learn that they have to hide behind the mask in order to be successful. Addicts learn that we have to hide behind the mask in order to get what we want. And the difference is that when you tell a leader that they need to stop hiding behind the mask, they have the same problem that an addict in active addiction has. And that is that if you tell an addict to stop, you can tell them all the times you want until you're blue in the face to stop, and they don't stop. Addicts do not stop until you tell them what to start instead. And so the thing is that we get to learn a specific step-by-step methodology that allows us to truly become our true selves and live a principled way that allows us to go out into the world and operate with a completely set of parameters, but not because we're special, not because we're righteous, not because of whatever, because someone actually figured out that you need to do with recovery what every business in the world needs to do. And that is, you need to be able to codify how you deliver your promise and scale it so you can repeat it over and over and over again. You go to McDonald's, you get 2 pickles on your cheeseburger. Well, you tell an addict to get clean or to stop drinking, you got to give them a process that works. You can't just say, hey, man, you should stop doing that. Good luck. You got to give them a step-by-step process. And so McDonald's has a specific step-by-step process that leads to you always getting 2 pickles on your cheeseburger, but we don't have that for authentic leaders. And the only place that is teaching people a step-by-step process to live and lead what I call mask-free is in the rooms of recovery, in the 12-step, in all recovery programs. They're teaching addicts how to live a different way. And so it's not that addicts are better necessarily. It's just that we're trained.
Right.
And most traditional leaders don't have access to that training.
Yeah, it's amazing. So at what point in your recovery did this click for you?
So there's 2 different points that things clicked. There was the moment when I realized taking my mask off professionally wouldn't kill me. And then there's when I realized that it would help me. And those are 2 different things. And so the time when I realized it wouldn't hurt me was when I got out of rehab. I went into a halfway house and I had 5 business days to get a job. And I went around applying everywhere, but I had this huge gap in my resume. No one was calling me. And if I didn't get a job, I was going to get kicked out of this halfway house. And then a CD store, back when we would get CDs out of an actual store before Spotify, called me for an interview. And before I went in, I talked to my sponsor and I said, what do I do when they ask me about this gap on my resume? Because obviously I can't tell them the truth. And he said, no, that's exactly what you're going to do. Go tell them the truth. And I was like, dude, there's no way I'll get this job. And if I don't get this job, I'll get kicked out of the halfway house. I get kicked out of the halfway house. I'll be on the street. I'll use and I will die. So give me something to tell them. And he said, dude, the point is not the outcome. The point is the process. And the question is, are you willing to do whatever it takes to get and stay clean, no matter what the cost is? And this is your first test. And that was something that boggled my mind. And when we start breaking down what he was teaching me to, and these are my 3 principles, to practice rigorous authenticity, to surrender the outcome when I do, and then go do uncomfortable work. And these 3 principles, leaders in the professional world are not taught how to do, but I had to practice not to get a job so that I didn't use and die. And so I went in there and I didn't lie as much as I wanted to. And to my surprise, I got the job. And that's when I realized that 85% of the worst things that we imagine, we found data to actually prove this, 85% of the worst things that we imagine never come true. And so it's an incredible waste of time to imagine all the ways that something is going to go horribly wrong when you are pulling off your mask and showing your true self at work. And so that was the circumstance in which I didn't die. But it wasn't until I went into corporate America a year later, and I spent 8 years working my way up the corporate ladder at a Fortune 50 company. I went from a temporary rep at a kiosk at the mall to in 8 years being a corporate leader with $250 million budget, 19 direct reports in my 20s with no college degree as a drug addict with hoop earrings and long hair. And in my ascent through that corporate environment, I realized I'm not special. I wasn't doing anything special, but I was practicing rigorous authenticity, surrendering the outcome and doing uncomfortable work. And it made people trust me. It made me grow faster. It saved me an incredible amount of time and allowed me to connect with others in a way that the people that were my mentors became my employees. Again, not because I'm special, but because I started to apply these principles out of practice, and I started to realize that they were a weapon. They were, maybe weapon's too strong, but they were a competitive advantage. I felt like Wolverine that discovered his claws.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
yeah. For me in my, growth in life and learning how to be a sober person, one of the real milestones for me was in the very beginning, first day of treatment, telling my story to a community of men and not leaving anything out. Because there were a couple things that I was really embarrassed about. And,
sure.
and I was, the big one was, there were times at the end of my drinking when things got really bad and I was trying to control it. And, there was a half gallon of Listerine under the sink in the bathroom always. And, I lowered myself to that. And, not just a few times, like the last several months of my alcoholism, there was a lot of that stuff going on, and, really, really ashamed. So, but I went and sat, and I knew I just, like what you call doing the uncomfortable work.
Yep.
I just pushed myself through. I knew I had to get honest about this. And I was shocked at the love that I experienced as a result of that, because, when we actually let people know who we are, they respond. That's another thing about all this that, when we're faking it, people know, people sniff it out, and people wholeheartedly appreciate it when you're truly authentic and you show up for them as in a real way. And so at that time when I thought like, man, they're going to shun me when they find out about this, it was like, they were just grateful that I got real. And it gave them permission to do the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the transition that leadership in this world is going through. And that's what drug addicts and other people in recovery have to teach the leaders of this world is, there used to be a time where command and control style leadership was the way. And so what happened was you have centralized decision making, and that's really helpful when you have distributed mechanisms of a company that are executing in the field that can't talk to each other and they don't have any autonomy. And so, the general wants the different battalions to execute to their orders and not question authority. And so you learn to wear this mask where you are, pretending that you have all the answers and that you're strong and that you're not weak, because you don't want anybody to question the plan.
Right.
And that is the preferred method of leadership in all of business today and corporate America. But 25 years ago, in 1997, the first social media website went up right around when a mobile phone started turning from a brick into something that was manageable. And now 25 years later, we find ourselves in a completely different world where connection with the people that we work with and we care about is at an all-time low because of technology. But we've also gone through an economic transformation in the last 25 years where we've gone from manufacturing economy to services economy. And in a services economy, you actually want to push out decision making to the front lines because now it's people that are the product and people are solving problems for other people. And so in a services economy, your connection with the customer is 10 times more important. So in a world where we have a tenth of the connection thanks to technology and connection is 10 times more important in our economy, it creates this window where suddenly the ability to connect in your humanity with either the people that you work with or the people that you are doing business with, or even in your personal life, creates a level of connection because no matter how much we put up the facade, that we have it all together. Nobody does.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody that's putting up that facade is dying inside. And when you can actually express your humanity and make it safe for another person to do the same, whether it's a business transaction, a personal, relationship, whatever, it creates a level of connectivity that transcends business. It creates a level of trust that transcends business. And so suddenly this as a skill set would be labeled self-help, woo-woo, new age, whatever, but this is next level business practice. Yeah. Actually, it's also really great for our personal life, but it is next level business practice. We are looking at a world right now that is the equivalent of no company has a website. And someone saying, you know what, I think company websites are going to be a big deal. That's literally what we're staring at when we talk about living authentically and leading authentically. It completely changes things. And it's not because we've always known this. Actually, up until 25 years ago, it didn't make sense from a business perspective. So it would only be a personal skill set. But now it's a professional skill set that companies want.
Yeah. And, being someone who, I'm an addictions counselor. I've worked in the addiction treatment industry. I mean, I think I've been in a little bit of a bubble when you've been out in corporate America, but I've actually had an opportunity to work at a couple different agencies that actually led the way that you're talking about. You know?
I bet they were very successful.
Yeah, absolutely. One of them now, actually, I have a contract with this small agency in Michigan called Feinberg Consulting, and this is the culture of our company that you're talking about. I mean, and it's, it's really showing itself now because this is just such an interesting time for business with the pandemic. I mean, everyone's having to adapt and it gives companies like the ones you're talking about the opportunity to show that transparency to the people who work for them and really act it out. And that's what I've been fortunate enough to experience. And in fact, the other agency that I worked for, it was the same kind of thing. When I worked for them, there was a crisis that they were going through. And, the guy at the tippity top was sending out emails to the whole entire staff, telling them exactly what was going on, and,
that's great.
Yeah. And, that facility, the book Good to Great. Are you familiar with that book?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So they had all of us read that book and the whole thing about getting the right people on the bus and then getting them on the right seats on the bus and all that. I mean, it really makes for a great employment experience. I mean, it really, one of the things about this, and you sort of glancingly mentioned it, but the quality of life that results from this, as opposed to what I would describe as the toxic way that you were describing, that's the masses are kind of doing. I mean, it feels so much better. And I think part of it is sort of generational too, because I know people closer to my age, I'm in my 40s, are more likely to lead more like you're talking about than someone in their 60s or 70s. Yep. So a lot of people who are retiring now, ruling by fear. There was a lot of that earlier in my career, and now it's becoming, less and less prevalent. I think, as much as we can get discouraged when we watch what's going on in the world, I mean, I think things are actually getting better. I really do. And I think you're right, that this is the way the world is going, to this sort of more spiritually informed leadership and business practices. So
yeah, there's a lot of good stuff happening around the edges. The concern that I have is it's not like the stuff we're talking about is not mainstream. And I think sometimes when I talk about this stuff, people write me off because, like, I'm an entrepreneur, ex-corporate person, startup guy. They think I'm always just obsessed with business. Like, to me, no. Like, the reason that I talk about this through the professional lens is because I thought the last place that I could practice these principles was at work. And then I left corporate America and founded my own company. And then we have what I call a mask-free culture. And that mask-free culture went up against companies with 150 million in venture capital and 10 times more employees against my credit card and my small team of 50 people. And we were so much better than them. And yet we didn't have any patents. We didn't have any investors. We didn't have any connections. Nobody had built a startup past $1 million in revenue. Like, there was no logical explanation for our success. But we were able to build a mask-free culture. And in that mask-free culture, I learned that I created a company where I just wanted to be safe, to be able to practice my principles. I didn't recognize that it would create a business advantage. But once I gave my TED talk and saw that it went like global and around the world and the video that you're referencing, I realized that people are thirsting for this. They want it. They want leaders that live and lead with what I call rigorous authenticity. It's just that nobody knows like how, especially from a business perspective, because a lot of this stuff ends up being, again, written off as self-help or whatever. And the reason I'm so focused on the professional application is for 3 reasons. Number one, that's the place that's supposed to be the most hostile to it. So what a victory if we can overcome that and make it a place that enables it. Number two, we spend more time at work thinking about how we're going to act and more scared about showing our true selves than just about anywhere else in our lives. So what an incredible practice ground. And then number three, if we can actually link living and leading mask-free to professional business outcomes, for example, I've assessed over 1,000 leaders, and they save on average 500 hours a year when they are able to live and lead mask-free. That's not an insignificant amount of time. That's 25% of an individual team or organization's time. That is a significant competitive advantage that actually leads to the bottom line. And if we can get leaders to prioritize that, then the leaders of this world will suddenly, out of self-interest, be acting in alignment with our vision of a mask-free world. And they help create the world that we all live in, regardless of whether it's personal or professional. So to me, it's about the intersection of addiction recovery and business is such an interesting intersection that very few people have ever explored. And to me, that's the intersection that will revolutionize the roles of leadership and fundamentally change our experience both in person, online, at work, and at home.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm doing this series on manhood now. I just did the first episode. It came out last week, and have a guy co-hosting with me, and we had a Zoom call with an author named Cleo Stiller, and she wrote this book, Modern Manhood. But, I mean, it was just kind of like let's get to know each other a little bit before we schedule this interview. And she was, we explained to her, we're both guys in long-term recovery. Like, that's why we get this stuff. Like, she's not used to guys being as open and understanding of things. It really is. I mean, it's just a muscle that we have and we get to use that everyone could benefit from, the open-mindedness, the willingness to be authentic, if I'm going to be real, like, male privilege is a thing, guys are, not mismanaging their emotions, and that comes out as toxicity, as much as some guys hate to hear that. But it was another example of how, what you're talking about, how it's such an advantage in life. It's like just a head start. But I wanted to ask you, the 500 hours, how did you arrive at that?
Yeah. So, Harvard Business Review an article where they talked about in the transition from a manufacturing economy to a services economy, the most scarce resource inside companies has gone from like raw materials to time. And so like there was another stat that we found that like people waste 31 hours a month in the working world in unproductive meetings that didn't need to happen. And so that's not how we arrived at the number. What we've done is we created what we call the mask assessment, where essentially we've distilled down that there are 4 masks that hold back every individual, team, and organization. And so when they go through this mask assessment, their goal is for them to identify which mask is holding them back the most. But one of the things that we started to do is to ask questions to have them quantify how much time the masks cost them. And as they started to identify how much time, it started to add up. Like, it seems innocuous at first. So it's like, 2 hours a day. Okay, 2 hours a day.
Well, it's a quarter of your full-time job.
That's a quarter of your day. That doesn't feel like a lot, but you know what? 10 hours a week sounds like a little bit more. But then when you start really adding it up and you get to 500 hours, and that's just at work, you realize that, like, so for those of us that are busy, because I haven't met a human today that says I'm not busy. That's looking at your calendar and having 3 months of completely open territory. Like completely free to focus on the highest value personal or professional projects. Or if you just like to stream stuff, 500 hours is enough time to watch every episode of Friends, every single episode of The Wire, every Marvel movie that was ever created, become a yoga certified instructor, and catch Tiger King documentary, and still have some time left over. And so when you think about how much time we are fettering away on an annual basis by focusing on these 4 masks, you start to realize that all of these courses and tools that will theoretically give you more time, like time blocking or using this app or whatever, they are all valuable, but there's like a really simple answer to actually reclaiming the largest amount of your time, and that is living and leading mask free if you can take those 4 masks off.
Have you, do you know the writer Sean Anker? Have you seen any of his work around happiness?
I'm aware of him, and I've seen some of his work, but I'm not sure how much of it I've actually read.
Well, he has a TED Talk too. I've read a little bit of it, but it's based on the idea that, we think of success as the source of happiness. We have these carrots that we dangle out in front of ourselves, these goals, and when I get this, I will be happy. And, you and I know that's not true. I mean, there will always be another carrot. And, so there's this school at Harvard now that studies happiness. And what they have concluded is it's really the other way around. It's happiness breeds success. And if we can find a way to be happy, then we can flourish. We have more energy, we have more time. And the kind of stuff you're talking about, authenticity, having the difficult conversations, you and I know that those things make us happier people because we're not carrying around this guilt and junk, from making bad decisions and covering them up. And, we have nothing to hide about who we are if we're being real. And it's exhausting hiding, it's exhausting hiding behind a mask. So,
so if you think about those 4 masks, so when I do a speaking engagement or a workshop or coaching or something like that, I will ask the 4 questions around these 4 masks, and I'll say what they are in a second. And whether there's 20 people, 200 people, or 2,000, everybody has identified with one of them as holding them back. So the first one is saying yes when you could say no. And that one's like, in the working world, that can be, a meeting, like those 31 hours of meetings. That can be emails that don't need to be responded to, agreeing to a project or a task or whatever. But in your personal life, that could be agreeing to a networking event, a party, your relatives staying over, like whatever. But saying yes when we could say no. And that leads us to not living a life that's true to us, but also makes us incredibly inefficient and less successful as a human, less happy.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is hiding a weakness. So, one of our biggest fears is if we share our weaknesses, that we'll get discovered as a fraud or people will think less of us, but 85% of the things that we worry about never happen. And so I can think about when I was sitting there spending 22 hours trying to figure out how to do a Microsoft Excel pivot table instead of spending 10 minutes asking someone for help. That was an incredible waste of time. Avoiding difficult conversations is the third one. So, that can be like in the working world, that can be needing resources or a raise from your boss, addressing a collaboration issue with a coworker. The number one offender is performance management of an employee, not wanting to give them constructive feedback where they're not working. It could be negotiating a contract with a customer or a partner. But even in this pandemic, on the personal side, it could be telling your significant other that you need some more time for personal space.
Right.
Like whatever it is, we are all sitting on avoiding difficult conversations. And what ends up happening is we have 7 meetings where we could have addressed everything in one. We're not fully understood. We waste a tremendous amount of time beating around the bush, and we don't get to the heart of the issue. And then the fourth one is holding back your unique perspective. And that's when people think that if there are people that are above them in quote unquote leadership positions, that they shouldn't represent their unique perspective because they're scared to be, seen as different. So for example, when you go to a meeting and your boss's boss is in the room, you are less likely to challenge a blind spot in the actual plan that they're talking about or offer your unique perspective around what could be innovative because you don't want to be different. You're not being trained to be a leader. You're trained to be a follower, and you need to fall in line with what your boss thinks and all that other kind of stuff. But when you add up these 4 things, it makes for teams that are woefully under optimized. It makes people stressed out and tired. It hinders their ability to grow and connect with each other. And it actually hinders their ability to be more successful when it comes to actually interacting with customers because their customers are all wearing these 4 masks too. Like they're all going through all the same crap. So like, how crazy would it be whether you're trying to like create a better career path for yourself at a company, whether you want to start your own company, you want to do things differently. I like to be able to live by this way to just truly take off the mask and live and lead mask free. You would be able to create a competitive advantage, not by investing in technology, not by investing in a Harvard MBA or whatever, but by investing in just taking off the mask and being your true self.
It's powerful stuff, man. Really
I'm obsessed with it. And sometimes I think I like my maniacal focus on the intersection of the stuff in work. Sometimes is like, it's difficult, but I think that in general, I think that a lot of people are really responding to it, interestingly, because a lot of people are impacted by addiction.
Oh, yeah.
And so where I'm coming from in terms of my message, I get a lot of recovering addicts, active addicts, or I've got people, the people that choose to live the 3 principles of my TED Talk. We built a program called the Mastery Program, and it's really about learning how to apply those principles and take off your mask in the professional world and the personal world. And I've got people in there that came to me because their child is an addict, and they were so encouraged by seeing a positive that comes out of recovery. Like a lot of times we think recovery is something that neutralizes a negative.
Right.
In society. You and I both know that it's the best thing ever. And for me, like I tell people all the time that I thank God for my addiction before I ever start talking to them about my recovery, because I'm grateful that it necessitates my need to stay engaged in recovery. Recovery is the best thing I ever got. But most people don't talk about recovery as a superpower or a secret weapon or whatever. They talk about it as, oh man, it's so great that you're not drinking. It's so great that you're not using. And actually what we learn in there is something that every professional wishes they could get a continuing education credit to learn.
Yeah, I know for me, I've been sober a long time, so if I don't have a reason to talk about it, I don't talk about it. I mean, aside from work, I mean, but sometimes meeting new people socially, they'll look at it like you don't get to, man, you never have a glass of wine, like you never, and it's what I think about is, my relationships with myself, with others, like they're meaningful. There's nothing superficial about my relationships for the most part. I mean, you meet people casually at work and all that. I mean, of course, but when I choose to really connect with somebody, I'm really there and I'm connecting. And when I go to a concert, I'm experiencing that concert completely. I get to be there completely for whatever it is. The day my son was born, Christmas's birthday, it's quality that I didn't have before in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just,
It's
and people do, they look at it as a loss. And, I was just having a conversation with some guys the other day, doing a group with some young guys. And for me, a big part of a big shift, well, the shift between I couldn't stay sober and I could. I mean, one of the things that clicked, and I had to go through enough pain to get to the point where it didn't feel like I was losing anything anymore. It felt like instead of I don't get to drink, it was I get to live. I get to have a life. Yeah. And that made a huge difference, my perspective. And, yeah, it's amazing how a subtle little thing like that can just make such a huge difference.
I genuinely believe it's the best thing that ever happened to me being an addict. I think, and everything you're talking about when it comes to the process of recovery, one of the things, that people will sometimes ask me, they'll be like, so you're saying you're grateful for the addiction? You mean recovery, right? And I'll be like, no, I'm grateful for the addiction. And they'll be like, why? And for me, I have two things, and you have two things that most people don't have. Number one, I have incentive. I have a loaded gun pointed at my head every day that says if I don't commit to living these principles, my life could be over. That's a very powerful incentive. And it sounds dramatic, but after a while, it is so helpful. It gives me the excuse. It gave me the excuse in corporate America in that job interview at Sam Goody. It gave me the excuse to do something that was terribly uncomfortable. And we've all seen the movie where someone has to jump off a cliff because the tiger's coming at them. And people don't just jump off cliffs I guess some crazy people jump off cliffs for fun, but most of us don't want to. But you get a tiger running at you, you might get the incentive to actually do it. Well, we're not talking about jumping off a cliff. We're talking about doing things that everybody wishes they could do. But not everybody has the incentive, because my wife is what, we call a normie, someone who's not an addict. She loves the term normie, by the way. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't have the same incentive that I do to practice these principles in all my affairs. So number one, I've got incentive, but number two, I've got the actual practice ground. So one of the things when you think about Division I colleges or pro athlete teams is people will talk about these world-class athletes have access to the very best of everything when it comes to preparing them for the game. They have the best exercise equipment, the best, game equipment, the best medical professional
food,
treatment,
everything.
All that kind of stuff. Right.
Mm-hmm. But,
for me, the equivalent of that is in my 12-step fellowship. And I'm not limiting recovery to 12-step. There's more than just 12-step when it comes to people's ability to recover, but they all are very similar. And that's the one that most people know. But that is the equivalent of a state-of-the-art practice facility for learning how to live and lead mask free. And the problem is that if you don't have that incentive, you don't really walk into that room, because nobody wants to walk into a room and say, hi, I'm Michael Brody-Waite and I am a drug addict, and go drink a really shitty cup of coffee, for an hour and hang out with all the addicts that are smoking cigarettes after. Like, nobody wants to go do that unless you're actually walking around with that incentive. And so that incentive drives me to the practice ground, and the practice ground is what gives me a skill set that I think that most people deep down wish they could have, that's totally accessible to them. They just don't have the same incentive to seek it out, and they don't have the same opportunity to practice it.
Yeah. Yeah. Even if it's just the walking through fear thing, that's huge.
Just surrendering the outcome. When I talk about my 3 principles, the smartest people, it doesn't matter, because like, we know you can be smart, doesn't mean that you're going to get any of this. But surrendering the outcome is a concept that is completely counterintuitive to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's something that you and I had to master.
Yeah. And, I've even had people kind of take the position with me like it's some kind of cop out or something. No, I mean, I don't have to freak out, It's going to be okay no matter what. That's also one of the big gifts that, when you go to hell and back, I mean, what do I really have to get worked up about?
Oh, totally.
I mean, I survived that.
When the pandemic hit, it really ruined the promotion for my book release. And my PR company was talking to me, and they said, and this was before it really got even to where it was, before people were considering sheltering in place. It was just like a potential narrative. Mm-hmm. And she was like, so what are you and the other addicts doing about this? And I said, well, we had our home group business meeting last night, and we spent no time talking about it. She's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, like, for us, first of all, we're just happy we're not smoking crack. Right. Second of all, we're obsessed with focusing on what we can control and learning to surrender what we can't. And we knew that we would be able to deal with the issue at hand when it came, but there was no point in obsessing over what might be. When meanwhile, in our business meeting, we were trying to figure out how to serve the newcomer addict that was about to walk through the door that night. And I explained to her that a pandemic is very similar to what all addicts experience, period. That we are being isolated due to a disease that we have no control over. And so the thing is that those of us in recovery have a tremendous amount of experience, and people that think that surrendering the outcome is a cop-out don't really understand how surrendering the outcome works. Right. Surrendering the outcome is not letting go of everything. It's letting go of the results so that you can identify everything that you can't control and exclusively focus on what you can control. It's energy conservation. Anybody that is interested in a fuel-efficient car should be able to relate to the advantage of surrendering the outcome. Anything that makes you more efficient with the limited resources that you have gives you an advantage personally, professionally, or whatever. And we waste a tremendous amount of time and energy as a society focusing on things that we can't control at the expense of the things that we can. At home, we're focusing on what all the politicians are doing instead of making sure that we eat healthy and work out and don't spend too much money. At work, salespeople are worrying about what their quotas are instead of like actually making the sales calls that actually lead to sales. But like wherever you look, people are focusing on things that they can't control at the expense of the things that they can. And until you go through something like addiction, you don't really learn what true powerlessness is. And therefore, you don't have to master how to surrender. And as a result, it feels like a cop-out. But I would say that the real cop-out is someone that's actually wasting a tremendous amount of time trying to control something that they can't. That's the cop-out. That's right. Not participating in life. That's not taking responsibility for your own agency. That's not actually optimizing your impact on the people around you.
Yeah. And, you know, if you want to go a layer deeper, I mean, a lot of people stay stuck there spinning their wheels because they're avoiding something else, you know?
Yeah. Oh yeah. We love, I mean, you know, I know this, but like we love drama as a way to escape our own, right? Like I wrote something to someone the other day that was like really worried about what people were saying about what she's doing. And I said, in a world where words have become cheaper than they've ever been, action is more valuable than it's ever been. And when you really think about like our world, it used to be that for someone to comment on what you were doing, they had to be in the same room with you, send you a letter, or you had to be on a TV or radio show. Yeah. Like that's the only way for someone that you're not inviting in to comment on what you're doing. Right. And then nobody had any visibility to what you were doing. Right. And now whatever you do, as long as it's in the public domain in some capacity, will be commented on, liked, ridiculed, trolled, whatever. And so for every action, there's an exponential amount of words that are used by society to comment on that action. And so as a result, people take less action and they're scared to. So in that economy where words are plenty and action becomes scarce, your actions can become a lot more important than the words that are going on around you. But it's really hard to let go of what those words are. And so people will focus on the words as an excuse not to take action.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's another version of the whole approval thing, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it really, to me, I don't love that social media gives everyone a platform. You know, everyone has a platform. I mean, I kind of liked it better when, the other thing I thought about when you're running down the list of how to, like, you know, either you're in the room or whatever, letters to the editor used to be a thing, you know? Now it's just, you know, you post something on Facebook and it's like nothing for somebody to take a shot at you. And that's another, to me, that's another place people hide, you know?
Oh yeah.
You know, what Brene Brown talks about being in the arena and, you know, those who are criticizing being spectators, and, you know, she's not doing it for the spectators. She's doing it for the, yeah. But I mean, there are just so many people out there that just so nasty too. I mean, it just amazes me, but,
hey, so actually I want to get your perspective on this. So okay. I was thinking about this last night. So like everybody's family is different, generations are different, all kinds of stuff. But when I think about, and I'm not an expert on any of this, but when I look at the generations, so I look at my grandparents, they came out of the Depression. They're immigrants. They had nothing. They were dirt poor. And they went through the Depression. And so they have a scarcity mindset. So anything that is a material good was to be treasured. So like when I would go to my grandparents' house, there would be, you know, cellophane on the living room couch, and like the carpet would have plastic over all of it. And so my mom was, raised, and my dad were raised in that mentality. And so they got a lot of like, okay, we can have even more stuff. We can protect our stuff even better, all that kind of stuff. So now you have the response where my generation and down are starting to shift towards minimalism, where I was reading a book and they were talking about how the character in the book, her mother, who was 80, had all of these dolls that she was collecting. And it was her passion. And they were just like flooded her house. And it was like dolls everywhere. And she was talking about how suffocating it was. And I was like, yeah, you know, like that's like an older generational thing, like cling to the stuff. We value stuff because we didn't have it. And so as my generation and younger starts to get into minimalism as a rebound from that, and we try to go to decluttering and not owning as much and all that kind of stuff, I can't help but think that our equivalent of hoarding is social media. Our equivalent of collecting garbage is all the digital shit that we're collecting right now. I keep my Goodreads up to date. I love to read. I don't really know why I keep it up to date. It must be ego. And maybe because I can reference it, I don't know. But like all all these things. And I put out a lot of social media, but my goal is to inspire people with mask-free content in a masked world online.
Right.
But I feel like we're collecting the equivalent of all the material stuff. It's just in the digital world, and the generations after, you know, my children are going to be like, Dad, why were you on so many social media sites? Why were you doing all this stuff? Like, it's just, and they'll be like, hey, look at all these dolls I have. And then everything will be like back to where it was.
Yeah.
Fallon, what do you think about that?
It's an interesting point of view, you know. It's funny because, I'm the youngest of 8 kids. So, I'm a Generation X guy, but most of my siblings are baby boomers. I had a nephew who was born before I was. So like my dad was, you know, he was helping feed his family at 8 years old. I mean, he was hustling at the gas station, convincing the owner to let him sweep at 8 years old. And so the scarcity mindset, so I'm chronologically, I'm probably nearer your generation, but generationally, I'm a generation before. So, and I relate, I've always related to older people a little bit more. But yeah, the whole thing about, I mean, I post stuff and part of it's just documenting it and a way to express myself. But what I don't ever do is get hung up on likes. And I know some people, they just post stuff and they're dying to see how many likes they're going to get or what, you know, to me, that just seems silly. Like, why would I be overly? So that part of it, I don't really get. Although I guess, you know, certain posts, I like to see when people respond to something I write, but yeah, I guess that would be. And the thing about minimalism is, you know, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about in writing, you know, in poetry, you know, the rules that you follow, those limitations, they force you to be creative in a way that you wouldn't have been otherwise. Those restraints. And
Yes.
I think minimalism has that same kind of effect on a person's life. You don't have all the stimuli surrounding you. Like, as I sit here, I have all kinds of shit hanging on my walls and, you know, like antiques laying around. And I mean, I love stuff like that. But when you're not stimulated so much, you have energy and attention to place elsewhere, you know?
How many times have we seen a movie or an article about someone that says, like, you know, we did a technology detox and we did so many interesting things with our family and our kids to you know, deal with our time. And they're doing all kinds of things that people don't typically do because they don't have that constraint.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I could go on like this forever. So what's next for you? So now you're promoting the book, and I assume you're doing a lot of stuff over Zoom or as opposed to in person.
I'm on a mission to revolutionize the rules of leadership. And the way that I'm going to do that is not alone, by building the mask-free program that actually my book and the mask-free program launched today.
Mm-hmm.
And the mask-free program, and which you may appreciate or not, is essentially modeled off of my experience in a 12-step program and then my experience in business. And in the mask-free program, we offer people the mask-free system, which is like similar. It isn't the 12 steps, but it's the 3 principles from my TED Talk, but similar in the sense that people have a common framework.
Mm-hmm.
There's a mask-free sponsor. someone that's going to guide you through working this mask-free system that takes that we do in 28-day increments, and it only takes 1 minute a day to learn how to live and lead mask-free. And then we have mask-free society meetings right now every Monday night at 6 p.m. Central. And we got people from different countries all over the U.S., Greece, Romania, you name it, in these meetings. And really, I'm using my book as a way to build the platform of the mask-free program to fundamentally revolutionize how leaders think about leadership and how they act, so that they can take the mask off and stop saying yes to things that they should say no to, stop hiding their weaknesses, stop avoiding difficult conversations, and stop holding back their unique perspective. And I'm very certain, well, I shouldn't say this because you never know. I'm fairly certain this is what I'll be doing the rest of my life, because it's the intersection of everything that that has mattered to me over the last 17 years of my recovery. And ever since my TED Talk went viral and got all the views, I got so many messages that I realized that people really wanted to be able to execute what was in my TED Talk. And that's why I wrote the book, and that's why I built the mastery program based off what they were asking for. I do speaking and coaching and all that kind of stuff, but like really the goal is building a mask-free program, a mask-free society. The first goal is 10,000 mask-free society members. The next goal is 1 million. And then the next goal is the rest of the world.
You know, as I'm listening to you, this is what I love about recovery, because without it, none of this happens.
Yeah.
You know? And
oh yeah,
we get an opportunity to literally go change the world.
Yeah.
It's
I would have been
amazing.
dead. I would have been dead 15 years ago. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't even be around to, you know, be of service to my daughter. Well, she wouldn't exist, I guess. But yeah, we're able to take all the trials and tribulations that we went through and turn it into good. And in my book and in the mastery program, I pay homage to the fact that, I'm not creating something completely new. I am taking something that showed me a way to create behavior change and simply applying it, with my own flavor and experience and integration in a different way. And so like, you know, even in the beginning of our Mastery Society meetings, I say, like, look, 80 years ago, if you were an addict or an alcoholic, there was no hope for you. Jails, institutions, or death was where you were going. And then one person, well, really a couple people, but like a couple people put together a step-by-step process that they codified into the 12 steps that now allow millions of people to have the freedom from active addiction. So why can't we have the same thing for the mask for everybody else? And why not use the basic tenets of what help people achieve that huge behavior change? Why not use the basic tenets, the three-legged stool of that program, as a model for how to actually bring the mask-free change to the masses? And so that's what we're doing. And throughout the entire way, I try to give as much credit as I can to my experience in the 12-step program, because yes, addicts get clean, they get sober, and they go change the world. But I'm not just doing that. I'm taking specifically the structure that I was given. I'm not using it because I would be disrespectful to the 12-step programs, but I'm definitely using the inspiration of how it worked as my model for creating a different three-legged stool with a very different application. And if I had not gone through it, and if I'm still active, if I had not continued to go through it, I would not have that. So it's, I owe everything to recovery.
Yeah. Well, it's, you know, another twist on the 12th step, you know, practicing these principles in all of our affairs. You know, a lot of people forget about that part.
That's one of the reasons I was so into it. I had so many sponsees that would be like, okay, I know we're supposed to do all this stuff, but what about with my boss? I'm like, why is it different?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you had to go back at one point in your life and tell the younger Michael something at a time when he needed help, what would it be?
So I think about the day that my friend Brian drove me to rehab. I was at the very bitter ends. I'd been, you know, kicked out of school, kicked out of my house, kicked out of my apartment, carved and repossessed, and I was throwing up blood. And I didn't think that I'd make it another day, let alone another year. And I remember him even being that broken and that hopeless. I remember driving to rehab and thinking that it sucked that I had to go and that it wouldn't help me. And it was annoying that I was even going and it wouldn't work for me. And so if I could go back to the Michael that's in the car, that's begrudgingly on his way to the Betty Ford Center out in Rancho Mirage, California, I would have whispered in his ear, like, dude, you're not on your way to figure out how to survive. You're on your way to a place and a way of living that's going to teach you how to thrive. And that instead of what you have being a stigma, it can become a fucking superpower. But you're going to have to have patience, and you're going to have to surrender the outcome in order to do it, but it'll be worth it. That's what I would go tell myself. I don't know that I would listen to myself, but I mean, being real, right? Like, yes, if this is the movie, I go, oh my God, okay. But like in reality, I'd be like, shut the F up. I don't know what you're talking about, future Mike. But that's what I would tell me.
Yeah. Another thing I'll just say is in my career and in my personal recovery, I mean, I've always been really grateful and aware that I had great treatment. I mean, just like second to none. And, I wasn't going to ask you where you went, but so did you, I mean, gold standard treatment, and it really does make a difference. There's a huge difference between good treatment and good treatment. It makes a big difference.
It helps. Now, I will say something that the old timers told me, that I see the point of it, but I also don't think it's helpful. They said, treatment, that's just an expensive place to go where they can tell you where 12-step meetings are.
Yeah.
And I think that, every generation has a bias towards the way that they forge their path.
Yeah.
I think that there are a lot of really quality people and organizations that exist to help addicts. And I think that addicts need as much help as possible to be able to overcome the disease of addiction. And so regardless of what the path is, whether it's inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, simply showing up to the 12-step meeting, talking with a counselor, the point is you can't do it yourself.
Right.
Like that's the point. And there is someone that has figured this out, and it's not you. So the goal isn't to ask yourself, what do you do? It's to go find the people that have it figured out. And to your point, there's a lot of really good quality options out there. And when they are good options, they can have a really massive impact. I don't think that me going to that rehab is the reason that I have 17 years clean. But I think that the reason that me going to that rehab is the reason that I had 30 days clean and I knew what to do next.
Right.
And without that, I wouldn't be here 17 years later.
Yeah. It's a big head start. That's the way that I've
huge.
always looked at it. But I really appreciate, your openness, because, when my first few years of recovery and in my career, I was pretty rigid about, well, this is the way I did it. So this is the way that it's, and it's something that, is a problem in a lot of treatment facilities when clinical staff are hung up on that stuff. And I think, we talked about the changes among the generations. I'm pretty big on the jargon that we use. And when I work with young guys, especially, I try to never use the slogans. I don't break out God until I know they're already there, right. And just being aware of our audience. The 12 steps saved my life, and I think they can probably save about anybody's life. But if you're not open to hearing it, we have to be willing to adjust the verbiage that we use to connect with the audience that we have in front of us. And, and I think that's huge.
Right.
Listen, man, I love what you're doing. I really appreciate you being on the show. This has been great. So, good luck
Dude,
with your
thanks for
book.
having me, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, there you go, Michael Brody-Waite. You can find a link to his website and the book in the show notes. Please leave a rating or a review at Apple Podcasts or wherever it is you listen. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend. We'd love to hear from you. You can email the show at thepathtooauthenticity@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram, both at The Path to Authenticity. We have playlists on Spotify. You can find the show on Patreon, where by supporting it, you can gain access to supplemental content and early access to episodes. So thanks for listening. I hope you keep coming back. We got plenty of good stuff to come, including an episode with an eating disorder expert. Also have part 2 with Safa Kagan. So please keep coming back. Tell somebody about the show. Thanks for listening. Be nice.
Great, honeybee.
The Path to Authenticity is powered by Equivox. For digital marketing and web design services, visit equivox.com.